that we're living in. We, as a culture, must conventionalize and believe that today is whatever it is, November 5th or 6th, 1988. But some of us are living in the 21st century, and some of us are living in the 18th century. And the goal, is to try and move all this forward. This is why it's funny, certain themes that have emerged in the Western mind are in fact very psychedelic, and one of them is the notion of progressivism, which is a pretty Western idea and quite psychedelic. It's the idea that things are getting better, or that things can get better. Most societies look backward toward a paradigm of a past paradise, and all effort is toward recovering this paradise. We're the only people who have this faith in progress, and it's quite strong in us, so strong that we barely question it. I remember the first time I was in Karachi, Pakistan. I was being hauled around the city in a rickshaw drawn by a guy with bare feet. I mean, it was a human-powered machine. And he spoke English, and we were scoring hash and this and that, so we got to know each other. And he said, in Pakistan, we understand what is wrong with the world. And I said, so what's wrong with the world? And he said, progress! That's what it is. We have to stop progress, which for me was quite a revelatory idea. This thing about time, though, is very interesting and operates on many different levels. Ultimately, I think what the psychedelic experience may be is a higher topological manifold of temporality. That the reason it is so puzzling and so familiar, so alien and so exalting, is that it is in fact mundane. It is in fact just us, but us sectioned through some higher spatial dimension. And if, for instance, you think about magic for a moment, let's think about the major identifiers of the magical act, such as psychic surgery, where your hand is plunged through the wall of the body cavity of a human being, and a tumorous organ is taken out, and no wound is visible. Typical and form of folk magic, much discussed. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Or the more typical, or another form of magic, stage magic in this case. A word is written on an envelope, and the envelope is locked in a box, and the blindfolded magician is able to tell the audience what the word is in the envelope in the box. And these things are miraculous. We cannot conceive of how they could be done. But if you allow the possibility of a higher spatial dimension, then these things become trivial, because it means the body is open. There is a way that from the point of view of this higher spatial dimension, the inside and the outside of the body are on the same side. So no problem is posed by removing this organ. Likewise, from the point of view of a higher spatial dimension, the locked box is open on one end. The end that is intersecting that dimension. So the way you read the message is you just go over and look. It's completely trivial. A way to make this cogent for people who are now thoroughly confused is to recall Edwin Abbott's fantasy Flatland, where he imagined a world of two dimensions, where a house was what in our world is what's called a blueprint. And that was all you needed, was the blueprint. And you could live in the blueprint because you walked in, and once you had closed the door, no one in Flatland could come through that blue line and get at you. But of course, to those of us in 3 dimensions, we just lean over and look at the blueprint and put your thumb in the inside of the Flatlander's living room, and from his point of view, from out of nowhere, an enormous thumb has magically appeared in his living room. Well, this shows how perfectly mundane situations on one level appear to be absolute violations of natural law on another level. And this is happening very much in the psychedelic experience because the mind is the cutting edge of the evolving event system. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the idea of this race that we're in between apocalypse and some kind of transformational event, and how your experience in altered states has led you to believe or feel that there's some hope for changing that, and why?
Well, I think it's clear that we're in a race between apocalypse and breakthrough. And I suppose breakthrough is the dark horse. Everything seems to be set up to favor apocalypse. It has the inside track. Except, of course, very few people would own up to saying that they personally want to die. You know, so why is it, if none of us really want to die, why is the overwhelming global cultural image one of inevitable catastrophe? I'm very optimistic. I really think history was for a purpose. I would not have not had it. I think it was useful, and that we must have learned something very important. What we learned that was so important, I'm not sure, but probably when we need it, we'll have it. I mean, maybe we need atomic weapons because a large object will be detected hurtling toward Earth. And if nature had not split off the monkeys 100,000 years ago and evolved intercontinental missile thermonuclear weapon delivery systems that we could use to destroy that asteroid, then all life on Earth would die. So what appears to us madness, our own dedication to the release of larger and larger amounts of energy for no purpose other than to destroy ourselves, is suddenly rescued from pathology and shown to be this tremendously foresightful thing, and thank God we did this because otherwise we'd all be dead and everything else would be dead. I don't seriously believe that, but I do think that we must have learned something very, very important. Perhaps cybernetics come in here. Perhaps this exoskeleton of mnemonic material that allows us essentially to freeze and record our entire culture. Everything is going into the data banks. One way of thinking about what's going on is compression of information. And history represents a compression of information, magnitudes more accelerated than the evolution of life. And then 20th century history represents an even greater information compression. Information finally compressed to such a degree that it's like the singularity inside a black hole. You know, a black hole has at its center a place where the equations don't sum. In other words, where it doesn't make any sense. And the only conclusion you can reach is that at that point of so-called infinite compression or singularity, another universe bursts into being somewhere else in a greater and vaster cosmology. And then the energy equations balance. Well, it's as though mind is undergoing this kind of gravitational collapse, and information is being compressed to such a degree that eventually it will not all fit in the present. And then the information begins to move off into the only dimensions available to it, which are the past and the future. Exactly as if you fill a glass with more water than it can hold. Once it has more water in it than it can hold, the water begins to flow down the sides and out into the larger domain. And so I think that people who try to use history, which is usually male egos and male-dominated institutions, are actually tremendously frustrated. We don't see it that way because to us it looks like they win every battle, because they win every election. But because they win every election, it is their job to manage this situation. It's a case of, you want it? Here it is. And they have not a clue as to how to manage it. So their thing is all about the headaches of ownership, while our political point of view is pretty much about the headaches of disenfranchisement. But I think that there is some kind of event ahead of us in time, not far, on the order of 20 to 40 years, that is casting an enormous shadow back through the lower dimensional slice of being, which we call history, so that religions and mystical visions and the visions of revolutionary leaders are a response to flickering intimations of this transcendental object that is pulling intelligence out of the organic matrix of life on this planet in a process that is occupying 50 to 100,000 years. It's extremely unusual what's happening, and a process that creates a series of self-transforming bootstrap steps in a period of 100,000 years means it's a unique kind of phenomenon. There's never been anything like it on the planet. What it is leading toward is hard to say, but I know that its values are the values of life, connectedness, primacy of experience, and caring. And it is using the historical process to wire us all together in some way. Control mechanisms are spreading through the society at an enormous rate. You know, it's interesting, one of the horror fantasies of the 1950s, which was when, you know, this conservative, straight, crew-cut point of view was really at its height. One of the fears of the future that people would just toss off offhandedly was, well, in the future, machines will take over and run everything. And this notion of the control of the planet wrested from the sure hands of noble human beings and instead betrayed into the power of calculating automatons was a great science fiction theme of the 50s. But it's interesting how impartial computers are. They are not ideologues. They are not, they're managers. And remember, I said the struggle was between the shaman manager and the ideologue politician. And so I think the cybernetic matrix is a tremendous tool for feminizing and radicalizing and psychedelicizing the social matrix. I see computers as entirely feminine. I mean, people have a reaction to this because they think that because men spend a lot of time around them and seem obsessed with them, that somehow it isn't feminine. but men have always been obsessed with the feminine. I mean, I think it was D.H. Lawrence who said what life is really about is men keeping women from ever suspecting how truly obsessed we are by them. So I think that this linking together, feminizing, cybernetic thing is part of the anticipation of this object at the end of time. What seems to be happening is we're all flowing together. I mean, we keep talking about unity, globalism, completion. Well, you better, you're going to get what you ordered. And I think what it means is probably the dear individual, which, don't be fooled, is a soft description of the male ego run rampant. The democratic individual, the citizen, this notion is in fair peril to be replaced by the person, which is a much more nubbly kind of concept. The person is not an interchangeable part. The citizen is. The citizen is a model of society based on the industrial revolution of the 18th century. But the person is a harking back to a pre-print model, and this is being set loose. It's what the hippies were, essentially. What they were trying to evoke was this do-your-own-thing idea. But there's a paradox here. The do-your-own-thing idea is somehow leading to this vectoring toward a unified cultural state where everybody is involved in everybody else. It's all right that it's paradoxical, because there's no reason that it should be reasonable. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could address the difference between the LSD experience and the mushroom experience, if there is a difference, and also your feelings about marijuana as an altered state.
Well, the LSD experience is, I speak only from my own experience, of course, but to me it seemed more psychoanalytical than psychedelic. I was in my early 20s when I encountered LSD. Maybe I had more stuff, as they say, to deal with. But it was not a reliable visionary drug for me. It caused me to have funny ideas. It seemed mostly to be a thought thing, but not a visual thing. And somehow in my education, somewhere along the way, I had picked up this bias in favor of the visual channel. I wasn't satisfied with LSD. I wanted those things that Havelock Ellis describes, where he talks about, jeweled ruins and phosphorescent maidens in diaphanous gowns howling demon songs beneath a violet moon. And that was what I wanted, not funny ideas. And what I found, and I worked pretty diligently at it with LSD, I found that my most satisfying LSD experiences were while smoking hash. And that really did do something interesting, sent it skittering off in these wonderful visionary directions. But these things do have characters. And this is something probably worth talking about in this group, that at low doses, everything seems like everything else. In other words, a little mescaline, a tiny amount of LSD, a little bit of MDMA, a tiny tad of psilocybin. All of these things simply register as wired, arousal, eager to hear what's being said and follow the thread of the argument, and just absolutely fascinated by what's going on, no matter what's going on. But as you raise the dose, the character of these things begins to appear. And for instance, psilocybin is, to my mind, in many ways the most anomalous, because, number one, this thing about how it speaks, it does speak, and none of the others do. I mean, the others, you may occasionally, in years of fiddling, get a sentence or two, but the mushroom just is voluble. It just comes on and raves, you know. And sometimes you even, and people have said to me, it really does rave. I mean, it's not a calm, it's not a go with the flow rap. It's a rap about planetary destiny in the next 10 million years and the last 10 million years. And, you know, it's this trumpet blast, Cecil B. DeMille, hyper, you know, real like that. Well, then something like ayahuasca, which is this thing these shamans use in the Amazon basin that's based on DMT and monoamine oxidase inhibitors, you take that and it's about the rivers and the jungle and these people and their humility and dignity and your humility and dignity and the earth and plants and life and water and sunlight, and it's this totally earthbound terrestrial life affirming thing. And it does not speak, but it's an eye, and its language is visual, and it, after an ayahuasca trip, you just feel like your eyes are literally bulging out of your head. I mean, you've spent 6 hours looking, just, you know, not really doing anything else but looking. Well, then something like Datura has this watery, magical, forgetful, kind of witchy, occult quality. It's, you know, shadows, and a peculiar quality of erosion of your own attention, so that, you know, no matter who you are, you find yourself wandering through empty colonnades and under a sky pregnant with the possibility of rain. I mean, it's this strange, de Chirico-esque kind of landscape. DMT has another quality. It seems to convey you into just a world of utter outrage, where all linguistic, sensory, and analytical machinery is just brought to a screeching halt. So it's important to learn what you like and to learn what you can put up with. Someone at a recent weekend who takes mushrooms quite religiously and quite regularly, and I said, you know, does it ever get easier? And he said, no, it never gets easier. Each time what I pray as I go into it is, please let me be able to stand a little bit more. Because, you know, finally it is the real mystery. So the only way your relationship to it can end is by you averting your gaze. Because no human being can gaze into it endlessly, because it is, it is what it says it is. It is the other. I was groping for the Hebrew, but not finding it. Yes. Yeah.
Just want to follow up on that question a little bit. Stan Grof describes LSD as a non-specific amplifier. And by that he means it amplifies what's already existing in the psyche. And he uses this metaphor that LSD serves as a kind of telescope or microscope, in that it does not itself produce the experience, but rather it enables you to have an experience that's already there in potentia, latent in your psyche. And I just wonder if you could comment on that, since you just have now described the various psychoactives as having a character. So in his framework, would you disagree with it, or would you say that the various telescopes are tinted with a certain lens, or how would you sort of reconcile?
Well, at the beginning of your question, you characterized LSD it's that it is a non-specific amplifier, but of the contents of the personal unconscious and the sensorium. What people notice about LSD is either what's right or wrong with themselves, or how freaky the world is. You know, a bug, a drop of water, it can be anything. But you discover the strangest things on LSD, and they're real things. I mean, relationships of reflections and windows. And I mean, it basically seems to be a tremendous amplifier of attention and analysis of the input of attention when directed into the outer world. And when directed into the inner world, it's an analytical tool for looking at past history of the individual, which is what I call the personal unconscious. The thing that always puzzled me about enthusiasts of LSD was that they claimed that beyond this lie what they called the white light, which they put great store by and made all kinds of Buddhist associations to it. I don't know if I've ever had the white light experience. As I go deeper into strong psychedelics, what happens is multiplicity proliferates. There is not a simplifying. There is a further and further and further complexifying. And I was talking to someone at Ojai Foundation about this, and they said, but surely beyond all this there is some kind of simplification and unity. And I said, well, that I wasn't sure, that maybe it's just, you know, an infinite samsaric ocean in all directions, in all dimensions, forever. Ketamine comes closer to providing a no observer, nothing observed kind of state, but you can't do much with that. I mean, you can have it, but there is, of course, with the dropping of all boundaries, a feeling of release. But what I'm interested in are bringing back artifacts to share with the tribe. And I've accepted that they will come in the form of either things that can be painted or things that can be said. And since I'm better at the saying than the painting, I work like that. Stan is a good friend of mine. We've talked about this over the years. I just can't confirm his maps of the psyche. I don't see those states occurring along a continuum the way that he says they do. I think it's much more chaotic, and that if his categories work to facilitate psychotherapy, then that's good, because that's what he's interested in. In other words, I see his maps as very, very provisional and useless and useful for navigating. But I doubt that when we get the final maps, if we ever do, that they will bear terrifically much resemblance to that. And I think he would agree with that. I mean, we're not at loggerheads about this. Anybody who works with psychedelics, their ultimate position is that, hell, they don't know. And on that note, why don't we go to lunch, and we will reassemble at 2 o'clock. If you're new to the neighborhood, Haight Street is 2 blocks down Ashbury, and there's a plethora of restaurants to choose from down there. Okay, I think we're all here, or people are pulling together. So we'll talk for an hour or so, and then we'll break, and then we'll go to 4. Well, This afternoon I thought we would do some operational homework and academic referencing. One of the most important things about all of this that we've been discussing is to get the information straight, to be as well informed as possible. I mean, it's as important to be well informed in this area, if you're going to do it, as it is to be well informed about procedures in skin diving and that sort of thing, if you're going to do that. Does that make you happy?
We're okay.
Before I talk about that, why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, hi. My name is Stephen, and I met you at Ralph's wedding.
Right, I remember.
Yeah. And we have a mutual friend, in Dr. Marsden, who told me about some of his experiences. And I have a little bit of a background in academic herbology and pharmacognosy. I've studied pharmacy and chemistry and naturopathy. So I've had a long-standing interest in pharmaceuticals and the biochemistry of the brain. But due to my paranoia of my professional license, I let it control me until about 6 months ago when I was in Sedona and started to commune with the goddess in the rocks, and she said, "Go for the mushroom."
And so what do you do for a living now?
Well, I basically did not tell the Department of Defense that I'm employed with about these experiences. I'm the Director of Pharmacy Services for the military at Ford and the city of Monterey. So you have... welcome.
Maybe you should tell them.
I don't think so.
No.
I'm not ready for it.
No.
Maybe you could spike their punch or something.
Well, boring from within is always an effective strategy, maybe the only effective strategy when you're as few in numbers as we are. Well, welcome. I'm sure that whatever we said that you missed will be said again and is on tape. Okay, well, what I thought I'd do at the beginning of this afternoon today, apropos of this idea that people should inform themselves about what's going on, because though you can't find out everything, you can find out a lot more than most people know. And it's amazing to me the number of people who would pay a couple of $100 to come to a weekend with a person like myself to learn about psychedelics, when a couple of $100 would get you quite far in a bookstore, and the public library is a marvelous resource for this stuff. So I hauled some titles off my own bookshelf, and I'll go through them. This is by no means all. I just simply chose books that I thought were either important to the field or I felt would be fairly easy for someone to obtain if they wanted to look into these matters. This one, some of you may know. This is probably the easiest to obtain and the most compendious. It's Plants of the Gods by Richard Evans Schultes, who's Professor Emeritus of Botany at Harvard. And this is basically the distillation of his life's work. It's filled with pictures. It has all kinds of information arranged in this kind of table form where you can look up a plant, get a notion of what it looks like, what family it belongs to, what its chemical constituents are, and so forth. And it has a very good bibliography and a chemical appendix. So this is around and highly recommended. If you want to go slightly deeper than that book goes, this is the academic version of the same book. This is the botany and chemistry of hallucinogens. This is the Bible of this field because it lists, virtually the state of the art circa 1980 and compendious bibliography and unopened mail. And this book, though, this is an expensive academic press, but highly recommended. If you had to have just one book on hallucinogens, this would probably be the one to go for. It's also by Richard Evans Schultes and Albert Hofmann, who some of you may know as the discoverer of LSD and the man who first characterized and synthesized psilocybin. From a slightly more countercultural point of view, the revised edition of the Psychedelics Encyclopedia by Peter Stafford, who some of you may know. And again, this is an effort to be compendious. No one of these books should be taken as gospel. I mean, you want to get it from several different sources before you conclude any given fact is true. But this book is published by Tarcher in L.A. I think this is a fairly easily obtained book.
Is that the newest? We just talked to him at the Transpersonal Conference, and he said he was coming out with the revised editions.
That'll be, this is the second edition, and he's going to do a third edition. Yeah. And he's very good about keeping up on the literature and following it through. This is an interesting book. Peter Stafford. Then, for those of you who are more inclined to pharmacology and neurophysiology and that sort of thing, this is a fairly hard book to obtain, but in a way it's never been surpassed. This book is called The Hallucinogens by Hoffer and Osmond. And there was never a revised edition after 1965. Discusses a lot about LSD and psychotherapy, and also has all kinds of strange information that was never again mentioned in the literature, that was just sort of dropped out. So you can read here about, for instance, the hallucinogen dimethyl sulfoxide, where you drink 8 fluid ounces a day for 5 successive days, and then the onset of hallucinations begin that are supposedly quite spectacular. It's just that the notion of drinking 8 fluid ounces of this bizarre chemical compound is not too appetizing.
Is that still available in the book?
I doubt it. I think you probably have to have a scientific book searcher hunt this one down for you. Hoffer and Osmond, the hallucinogens. And then for sort of the state-of-the-art, in a simple one in one book, is Solomon H. Snyder's book, Drugs and the Brain. And it doesn't simply address hallucinogens. It talks about all kinds of drugs, but explains the mechanism of drug activity, the notion of the lock and key activity of the drug molecule to the synaptic cleft, and it gives you a short basic course in neurology. And Saul Snyder is one of the giants of psychopharmacology, Nobel Prize winner, so forth and so on. So, Drugs and the Brain by Solomon Snyder. Let's see here. Here's another book, somewhat on the line of Snyder's book. This is one of the most recent books written on hallucinogens. It's by, the editor is Barry Jacobs. Hallucinogens, Neurochemical, Behavioral, and Clinical Perspectives. And as my brother said, all of the uninteresting perspectives are covered here very thoroughly and in detail. And what these books are good for, besides whatever they say, is that they contain excellent bibliographies. So tracing a particular problem, you go to these books and then they direct you to the journal articles that give you what you want to know. Most of the literature of psychopharmacology is in journals, which you will never, as a layman, encounter unless you go to medical libraries and attempt to see these things. Things like Lloydia and, I don't know, Acta Neurologica and all of this, the Journal of Psychopharmacology and this sort of thing. But you can be directed to the, some of these journals cost as much as $200 and $300 a year to subscribe to. So if you don't want to do that, the bibliography directs you to the articles you need, and you just go to the med library and Xerox them out. It's edited by Barry Jacobs. I'm trying to do this in some kind of reasonable order. Let's see. Then this sort of bridges the gap between pharmacology, sociology, and anthropology. This is Brian Dutoit, I guess, D-U space T-O-I-T. Drugs, Dutoit, Brian Dutoit. Drugs, Rituals, and Altered States of Consciousness. And some of the altered states of consciousness, Let me see if I can make a quick identification here. I think this is actually Banisteriopsis rusbiana, which is a rare admixture plant, contains DMT, but has the lanceolate leaf end that distinguishes it from Banisteriopsis caapi. Probably could do 10 years for the book. The publisher on this one is a weird one. It's Balkema, Balkema of Rotterdam. So it's a Dutch publisher. The author's name is Dutoit, D-U-T-O-I-T. Yeah, this is a good one. And so then, sort of moving out of the realm of pharmacology and psychology and into the specifically anthropological stuff, this is one that a number of various contributors. Alternate States of Consciousness, Multiple Perspectives on the Study of Consciousness, edited by Norman Zinberg of Harvard. And this deals not only with shamanic drug usage, but heroin, the heroin subculture, and a number of different things. Urban drug cultures are discussed as well. Mostly a sociological perspective here. Zinberg. And then moving into the more specifically anthropological stuff, in what order? Let's see. Well, here's my favorite one. Before he got into drumming, Michael Harner edited this book, Hallucinogens and Shamanism, Oxford University Press, available in print, in paper. And a number of writers contributed to this. There are about 3 articles on ayahuasca that you just will not find anywhere else. 4 articles. Articles on peyote, a wonderful article by Henry Munn called The Mushrooms of Language, just a classic article on mushrooms. So this I highly recommend. No, hallucinogens and shamanism.
Is there a book in the Bay, a bookstore in the Bay Area that possibly might have most of these?
Well, to have most of them, that would be a breakthrough. The place I would start would be Moe's in Berkeley, and then Black Oak in Berkeley, and then Green Apple in the city, and you just basically Pellucidar in Albany. The better bookstores with large inventories of used books. Yeah, they have a drug section at Shambhala.
I was in there, they didn't have very much.
Well, it's because they only have, or mostly have, in-print books. Most of these books are not in print and have to be searched for. This may be. I don't know. I haven't kept up. A sort of similar book, but by a different author, is Flesh of the Gods, The Ritual Use of Hallucinogens by Peter First, who's an anthropologist who made his reputation among the Huichol in Mexico. And this is, again, articles by Wasson First, Doug Sharon, William M. Bowden, Fernandez, Reichel Dolmatov, the usual names in this ethnobotanical field.